So to make the legs, I'm going to use a 4x4 Douglas fir. I'm going to make a compound cut on this with a bevel and a miter combo. So first I'm going to use the miter gauge to offset this to 5 degrees. Then I'm going to loosen the saw in the back and tilt a bevel to one side of 5 degrees as well. First cut I want to make will be right here at the double compound angle. So now that the first cut is made, I can just go ahead and slide the board down and make the next cut. And I want the next cut to be 18 inches from where this cut is. And then line the blade up on this end of the mark. This cut will match this cut exactly. So since I cut this with a compound cut, the leg will lean both this way and this way. So there's 2 angles. Now I'm going to repeat this and make 3 more of these. So now I have 4 identical legs, each with a compound angle cut on the top and the bottom. They're all the same height at all the same angle. So these legs are a little bit thicker than what I want. I'm gonna go ahead and plane them down a little bit to get them a little thinner, as well as take the curved edge off. So this will be the basic layout of the coffee table legs. So I'm gonna make the bottom apron from here to here using this board here. So I'm gonna take my track saw and rip a section off of this that'll look like that to make the apron for the bottom of this table. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and rip this end off here. And I've also got my track saw tilted to 5 degrees so that the angle on this cut will match the legs. So this cut here is a slight offset going this way at 5 degrees so that when I cut the apron, it'll match up with the legs and be square. So I want the bottom apron to be about 2.5 inches thick. So I'm gonna mark that on this side and the other side and then cut another similar cut with the track saw. This will be the apron that's offset at a 5 degree angle to match up perfectly centered with the legs. So I cut a couple identical apron pieces. So I'm going to lay everything out and mark the angles before I make the cut. So this is what I want the joint to look like. The problem is there's a gap here where this is cut on an angle. So I can cut this piece of the apron at an angle if I take the miter out but leave the bevel in. And now that joint is perfectly flush. So if I repeat the process on the other side, I'll have a perfect joint over there as well. So I went ahead and cut the other side, and this is basically what the layout will look like. To make things even more complicated, I want to actually raise the bottom apron off of the ground. So I'm going to use one of the other pieces of the apron to lift that up. So I like the height of that, but the table will be too long if I leave it as it is. So I need to take 3 inches off of the bottom apron to get the apron the length that I want. So this is the basic layout, and on the apron, I want to cut a lip right here and then over here so that I can put slats for a shelf to go this way in the middle. So I want to cut a slot out right here that runs the whole length of this board. So I'm going to do that on the router table. So here's the apron, and this is the piece that I want cut out here. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch straight bit and run this across this way to cut the groove out of that side. All right, so here's the lip where the planks will set, and it's gonna set right down in this. I'm gonna use 3/4 inch appearance board for the slats, so I need to cut a little bit further down so it'll set flush. So I'm gonna go ahead and raise the router bit, and then I'll make the same exact cut. So here's what this piece of the apron looks like when it's finished. There's a nice lip or slat cut here that the planks will set down. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the other piece of the apron and do the exact same thing. And so here's what the aprons look like after they're cut with the router table, and the slats that'll make up the shelves will sit down in here. I did get a little bit of tear out on the end of the router table. It's actually my first time using a router table, so if you know what I did wrong or you have any tips, please leave those below in the comments. All right, so in this portion of the legs, I'm gonna put an apron that goes across right here. I want it about halfway up the leg. So I'm gonna mark halfway up the height of the leg, almost 18 inches. So I'm gonna mark them right at 9 inches. And so I want the middle of those to be about 10.5 inches. And this is the third and final piece of the apron. So I already have the angle cut going with the legs where I cut the 5-degree section with the track saw. Now I just need to cut a bevel on this end and this end 10.5 inches wide. So here's the two other pieces of my apron. So each one is cut at a 5-degree angle offset rather than vertical, as well as a beveled miter cut on the ends. So to make sure this section of the apron is in the same spot, I'm just going to use my square to mark a line that'll be equal on every leg. So that line will be where the top of this piece of the apron meets each of the legs. So to get the piece of apron right in the center, I'm actually just going to eyeball it. That's pretty close to center. Now I'm going to trace the outline. So that's where this board will set whenever these are joined together. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on this side. So for these, I'm actually going to use pocket holes, and I'm going to drill these on the inside of the apron. So this apron will set like this. And I want the pocket holes to be on this side, so right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark this side of where I want the pocket holes to be drilled. So now I'm gonna put this board on the Craig jig with these two holes, and I'm gonna drill pocket holes on the inside of the board here and here. And that's what the pocket holes will look like. So those will be on the inside, and I'm gonna repeat that on this side. What the first side frame will look like assembled. The angles on the apron and the legs make pocket holes not the best option. I wasn't really sure how else to join these other than just glue. It did work, but I had to clamp the board and move the pocket holes around several times, so that was definitely a challenge. So similarly to how I put the side of the aprons on, I'm going to attach the bottom pieces of the apron with the lip in the same way using pocket holes. They're going to be on the underside here and then down there. So here's the inside of the side of the frame, the pocket holes on the board I just joined, and I'm going to lay this down this way and then attach the inside of the apron like this. I'm going to use this board as a spacer. And now I can attach these with pocket holes. So For the shelf slats, I'm going to use these furring strips. This is just pine 1x4. So I'm going to run these through the table saw, take off the curved edge on both sides, and then I'm going to cross cut them to length. So I have all the slats milled. Now I need to cross cut them to the length to make the shelf pieces. And so down in the lip is almost right at 13 inches. So I'm going to cut several of these at 13 inches and then just fill them in with even spacing on the bottom. So everything's lined up and I'm going to attach the bottom shelf boards with brad nails. So this is what we cut out with the router table earlier, and these boards set right down on top of it like that. For the top, I'm going to join 3 boards. These are 44 inches long by 6 3/4 inches wide. I went ahead and planed them down a little bit so they're smooth on both surfaces, and then I ripped each edge with my track saw. I'm going to join these with my dowel jig. So I made this mark on each of these boards with a square for a straight edge. So I'm going to drill into this board and this board using a doweling jig, and then I'll use dowels to line them up. Normally I don't use that many dowels on the boards, but this center board is a little bowed. You can see it rock. So I'm hoping that extra dowels will help pull some of that out. So this doweling jig is self-centering with holes on top. This is where I'll drill down into to make a hole right here on the edge of this board. The lines that I made line up with the dowel jig, so that's exactly center. So if I have it centered on this board and the other board, they'll line up perfectly. So I have the holes drilled on each side of the boards. Now I'm going to go ahead and join those using these 1/2-inch poplar dowels. These are mainly for alignment, but since they are thicker, they will add a little bit of strength, but most of the strength is going to come from the glue joint itself. So the top is joined and glued together. I'm going to lay it down and clamp it. These 3 clamps are the ones that actually clamp the boards together. And then I use these clamps to clamp a board onto these 3 boards to keep them level. So by clamping this on there, it'll flatten it out. Here's the tabletop after the clamps are pulled off, so everything glued up very nice. I'm going to go ahead and trim the edges off with the track saw to get these flat, and then I'm going to sand everything down. The table is all cleaned up and sanded, and now I'm going to detail the edges with a roundover bit. So the table is basically now assembled, and this is how it's going to be in the end. But I am concerned that the top may bow, so I'm going to put some supports on the underside of the tabletop. So I'm going to route 3 dovetail grooves all the way across and then cut a dovetail into a board that will slide in like this in 3 different places to keep the tabletop flat. So So I've got a 1/2 inch dovetail bit on the router. It's plunged to the end of the bit into the wood, and I'm going to cut a straight line through this on the middle line here and here. So I'll have 3 altogether. So now I have 3 dovetail grooves in the underside of the tabletop. I'm going to take the same dovetail bit and put it on the router table, cut a dovetail that will slide in here in each of the slots to keep this tabletop straight. So this is the board I'm going to use, and I'm going to cut a dovetail out on one side and then flip it over on the other side. Then this will fit down in the tabletop. So here's the first side. I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing. I don't know exactly how wide this should be, so I'm going to start with a very small piece and only cut about this far and then try to fit it in the tabletop. If it's too wide or too narrow, I'll just cut that off with a miter saw and try again until I get the width perfect. So here's the first dovetail groove. This is the end that I just cut, only up to here, just kind of a sacrificial piece. But it looks like the dovetail is just a little bit too wide. I'm going to adjust the fence just a little bit to take a little bit more off, and then that should slide down in there perfectly. And so here's my 2 dovetail support pieces. I'm going to go ahead and hammer these into the notches and then cut them with a handsaw. I got all these cut at an angle here. This is a little sloppy. I'm not the best with hand tools, so I'm going to clean that up with a sander. So everything's assembled and looks good. I'm going to go ahead and sand down any rough spots and any sharp edges, and then the table will be ready to stain. So everything is sanded down on the table now. I'm going to use Minwac Early American Wood Stain. It's one of my favorite wood stains to use. It's very easy to work with. And I like to stain the bottom or the underside of a project first. That way you can see how the wood takes the stain and how heavy to put the stain on. And so when you stain the top or the outside of the project, you want to go with the grain if you're able to do so. This will make any imperfections in the stain look like it goes with the grain. So for example, this spot here has set for a minute and I didn't brush the stain in, but it's okay because it's going in the direction with the grain. Early American's pretty easy to work with, so I'll be able to fix that. But on other stains, that line would definitely show. So if you stain in this direction on that end, you're gonna see the stain line. So try to go with the grain. So now I'm going to use a paintbrush to get down in some of the cracks to where I couldn't get the stain. Down in here, and then inside the pocket holes. So to attach the top, I'm going to use figure 8 tabletop fasteners, and I'm going to drill these into the legs with a Forstner bit and then screw them directly to the legs and to the tabletop. So the fastener will sit down in the leg like this. It's free to move a little bit from side to side when it pivots here. That way the table can properly expand and contract without cracking. So now that the figure 8 fasteners are attached to the legs, I can actually attach them to the top. So it's been a couple days and the stain is dry now. I'm going to put satin polyurethane on the table and it'll be finished. With the clear coat dry, the table was finished. I'm super happy with how this turned out. The compound angles and angled apron were a challenge that I really enjoyed on this build. This was a more complex build, but still a ton of fun. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more upcoming videos with free plans.